Welcome to Property Mama, Adventures in Real Estate. It is here each week I share all of the shenanigans that go on in the real estate industry. I've been buying and selling real estate for nearly 3 decades, so I have seen quite a few things. If we've not met before, my name is Wendy Chamberlain and I am a buyer's advocate, buyer's agent here in Melbourne, Australia. A warm welcome if this is your first time tuning in. I do hope you enjoy the adventures. And if you are loving our Property Mama Adventures in Real Estate, please do share with your friends and family and give us a like, because that will help us reach more people to share more adventures. Today, I wanted to share a little bit about the ethics of real estate agents. It's a bit of a hot topic because, rightly or wrongly, real estate agents do get the rap of relating to their ethics. So let me share you a story. I was approached recently by a buyer who came on board as a client. They were looking for someone to do a final inspection for you. So here in Victoria, you get an opportunity to do what's called a final inspection when you purchase a property. So the reason for a final inspection is for you to be able to do a walkthrough of the home to make sure everything is as it was when you first signed the contract. So settlement periods can vary and depends on where you are, where you're based in Australia or wherever you're located as to how long a settlement is. So common settlement periods here are 30, 45, 60, 90, even 120 days. They can be shorter or longer in other areas. And during that period of time, usually the vendor, if they're living in the property, they'll be making arrangements to move out. If the property sometimes is vacant, in my experience, vendors with vacant properties generally want a shorter settlement because they are still paying money on the property in most cases and they're not making any money from the property. Or where we have an owner-occupied home, often those people selling are looking for a longer settlement because they still have to organise themselves to move into new accommodation or generally to buy new property. So I was approached by someone who was quite nervous in their conversation that they were having with me around why they are wanting someone else to step in and do a final inspection. So the usual procedure is round about a week or so before the settlement date, you organise with the real estate agent to do a final walkthrough, a final inspection of everything. And what you're looking for are things that may be different or broken or not working or not as they were when you first signed the contract. So as examples, we've had, there was one scenario where our client was testing the range hood over the oven and it didn't work. And the agent goes, oh, that's because the power's not on. I said, yeah, look, the lights are on. So it wasn't that. And we organised with that vendor to get that repaired. So that was something that we were able to get repaired. Other things that can happen is they switch out dishwashers or remove a dishwasher when that should have been included with a sale. Things like removing curtains when curtains were there. And making sure they get put back. I remember when I purchased a property one time, they had a particular pattern on the curtain and I said, well, you can take those, but you need to replace them. And during the final inspection, they had taken them and there was just this bare window. And I said, well, you need to put something on there. And they ended up putting those curtains back on. I don't know why they didn't buy new curtains and take the ones they wanted, but that's what they did. So it's things like that. Now, there is a rule of thumb that generally you buy a property as is at the point of signing the contract. So if something was not right at signing the contract and you didn't flag it or bring it to someone's attention or have the solicitors negotiate around that, it's not something you can then enforce later on. So I get this call from this person and they say, I understand you do final inspections for all the people. And I said, well, yes, we do. And I said, well, what's the scenario? Why are you not wanting to do your own final inspection here? And he said that over the course of the settlement period, it seems that things had soured between both the vendor and the real estate agent. So I was talking to him because I was trying to understand what might have happened here that because he didn't want to go back to the house. He did not feel comfortable speaking to the real estate agents. He certainly didn't want to be involved or have any contact with the vendors, the people selling the property. And I said, well, what has happened here? He said, well, he had been told through the course of the settlement. So his was a 45-day settlement, which is fairly fast, 6 weeks. It's fairly fast here in Victoria. It's not uncommon, but commonly it's 60 days. But I know other states, certainly New South Wales generally is 45 days to exchange a contract. So I said, well, why are you not comfortable talking to the real estate agent? He said, oh, they've started to be really difficult, and they've started to say to us that the vendor is not going to settle on time, and that they're still living in the property, and that they may just be moving the settlement because they can. And the impression I was getting from him was it was to be vindictive about it, not for any other particular reason. And he did say that the vendor had purchased another property, and they had arranged for the settlement of the new property to be on the same day as the sale of their old property. Now, this is not uncommon, and we do work with clients quite a bit who are looking to sell a property and also buy a property. And it's up to personal preference and certainly risk appetite whether somebody chooses to sell first or buy first. And it also does depend on what is going on in the market as well, because where you're in a market where it is basically a bull market and prices are really going up quite fast, yes, you might get a great price for your home when you sell it. However, we have seen circumstances where the market is moving at such a clip that once you've sold your house and you're trying to buy back into the market, you have trouble and you struggle to get back into the market because the market has moved to such a level you can't actually catch up, or you can't buy what you otherwise wanted to buy. So that can be a problem as well. So we have that scenario, and then the reverse scenario is people wanting to buy first and then sell. And their reasoning is, well, if they buy first, they know what their budget is, and then they can sell their home. But then the challenge there can be that if they are buying and they're needing the funds from the sale, they have to tee it up so they can get their house sold. And what happens if they buy a property and for whatever reason, they can't sell their property? For example, the market might change, the market might drop, it might turn around. And this has happened before. And they've gone ahead and bought a property in what would be considered a seller's market because it's a higher market, it's more expensive, and then the market turns and they're trying to sell their house into a buyer's market, which means they're going to get less value for their home. So when people ask me, should I buy first or should I sell first, when they need to do both sides of the equation, I always say, well, it's up to you. Because another thing, if you sell first and then you're looking to buy and you can't find anything that suits you, that you're not happy with what's available, you can't find a property that you fall in love with to buy, your sale is still going through. You're on a clock. And what I see happening is people start to panic. They start to get nervous and anxious about the fact that their house is sold and they're going to be kicked out come settlement day. And where do they go? So a question I do ask there for clients is, do you have somewhere else to go? Because if you do not have somewhere else to go, you're going to be a bit snookered. And we've worked with clients before where they don't have any friends or family that they would be able to move into the accommodation for. And so their decision then is influenced about whether or not they buy first or they sell first based on personal circumstances. And I say that about real estate all the time. It's a very personal circumstance-based scenario business that we're in. And every single person is different. Every single scenario is different. Every single person is different. No two things are ever the same. So this particular vendor was living in the property for my client and moving out on the same day. So my understanding is that they were having the settlement of the property they were currently in, which my client was buying, at around 10 o'clock, and then they were doing the purchase of their next home at around 2:30 the same day, the same afternoon. But what had been coming down the in the messaging was that potentially the vendor was going to delay moving out of the property because of the scenarios and conversations and things that had gone on through the settlement period. And I started to think, okay, I wonder if the vendor and the real estate agent have asked for the early release of the deposit. So here in Victoria, under the Sale of Land Act, we have what is called a Section 27, and it is the agreements between the parties that they will release the deposit. So when you buy real estate, you generally have to put down a deposit, and here in Victoria, it's generally 10%. But we do buy with 5% deposit, certainly with many of our first-time buyers. And again, it's a case-by-case basis. You just have a conversation with the vendor. And if they're comfortable with a 5% deposit, well, then oftentimes we can buy a house like that, because a 5% deposit might still be $50,000, or $30,000. It's a chunk of change, and people are generally not going to be wanting to walk away from that by forfeiting it, which is what you would do. If you don't proceed with a sale and it's unconditional and you're in default, then the vendor can, and often do, take your deposit. So people are not wanting to walk away from those type of savings and commitments that they've put towards a property purchase. And so that 10% often is needed by the vendor, the one that's selling their property, to do whatever the next step is that they're wishing to do. So one would assume here in this scenario that the seller has committed to buy a property elsewhere because they're doing this settlement on the same day, and so they're wanting those deposit funds to be released. So where the deposit funds are paid, they are paid into the trust account of the real estate agent. That's generally where they go. Sometimes solicitors have trust accounts, but as a general rule, the deposit is paid into the trust account of the selling real estate agent, and it sits there and nobody touches it. So when the deposit is paid, we make sure that we are given a trust receipt, and the trust receipt gets given to all the parties involved, so they know that that 10% has been paid, and then the balance due, which is the 90%, is going to be paid on the date of settlement via whichever means, whatever the bank might be contributing, whatever owner funds might be getting dropped into the pool there. That's all worked out between the parties, between the solicitors, making sure that the purchaser has those funds available and ready and able to be accessed on the day of the settlement, at the time of the settlement. So I suspect here that this vendor wanted the 27 signed to release the deposit so that they could put it towards whatever their circumstances were. And my client, so remember, this client came to me basically a week before settlement. So they'd already gone ahead, found a property, purchased a property, paid the deposit, etc. But they had been approached by the real estate agent to release the Section 27, and they said no. There are some circumstances under which a Section 27 won't get released, and they generally relate to financial circumstances. So let's say you've paid a 10% deposit to purchase a property. If the vendor who owns the property doesn't own at least 10% of it, in most circumstances the bank has a good chunk of it, but if they haven't secured at least 10% equity in their property, there's no way you're going to pay them a 10% deposit, because you're paying them more money than they actually are owed. So under those circumstances, the solicitors just generally knock it back as a matter of course. If a Section 27 comes through as a request, it will get knocked back where the key circumstances or benchmarks it has to meet haven't been met. But it gets even more interesting here, because I found out later that when they had requested the Section 27, so the Section 27 is issued by the legal representative by the seller, and the real estate agent is usually involved at some point in there. And when it was actually issued whilst the property had clauses, had conditions on it. It was purchased, I believe, subject to finance. And whilst there are clauses in play, you are not supposed to issue a Section 27. So they've got in there, got super excited and issued the Section 27, which they shouldn't have done because they did it too early. They had to wait the full period for the release of any conditions, for any conditions to be satisfied and the property to be totally unconditional. So they hadn't done that. So they were going to get a knockback at that point anyway. So the vendor is asking for the Section 27. Now, I can tell you that the real estate agent would have been there asking for that and supporting it, because oftentimes the real estate agent is paid their commission out of the release of the 27 funds. Otherwise, they're waiting till settlement. So on a shorter settlement, 30-day, 45-day settlement, they'll get paid at that point. It's not a big issue. But if we've got a 90-day, 120-day settlement, the agent's not getting paid either until the house settles. And so they are often very enthusiastic and keen to get a Section 27 issued and approved and released. So when it is issued, it will get released anyway at the 28-day mark or roundabout there, provided it meets all the criteria. So issuing your Section 27 whilst you're in the middle of a conditional contract, it's not going to happen. And so I believe what's happened here is that the vendors' legal representatives have issued the Section 27. The solicitors for the purchaser have knocked it back because it shouldn't have been issued yet. And then they've actually said no. And I think people have got their noses out of joint. And they've started to get a little annoyed about this, people being the vendor and most likely the real estate agent. And this is all getting communicated through to our client. Again, this is all before we came on the scene. And so they've ended up making the purchaser, my client, extraordinarily uncomfortable about the whole process, to the point where he feels he needs to get a third party involved, which is us, to basically be Switzerland, to make a time to go and look at this property. Because he said to me, he thought that they would damage the property, that they would be putting holes in walls, doing things to the property just to be nasty and vindictive. So it goes to talk about what I see in relation to the ethics of real estate agents. So what conversations are you having with a purchaser that they feel so uncomfortable to the point that they need to get a third party involved? Honestly, that is terrible. That a purchaser purchasing a property should be filled with amazing emotions and excitement, because you're about to start creating new memories in a new home. It's a very exciting time. And the whole thing is getting soured because a conversation from the solicitors and the real estate agent for the selling party, because they're throwing their toys out of the pram because they're not getting their money. And they don't have to legally get their money. But you've caused so much anxiety for this buyer because of how you're behaving. It's just mind-blowing, the things that I see when it comes to the world of real estate, that people feel that they even have to get a third party involved here because of how you're behaving and your ethics. And some of the ethics I see, I often talk about and say real estate agents are fluid with the truth, which is probably my polite way to say that they lie like rugs. A lot of the time, they lie like rugs. And I think as the industry, it needs to have a bit of a cleanup in relation to how people are treated. And don't even get me started on how real estate agents treat renters and why they don't see renters as future purchasers. And renters sometimes have houses. They're just choosing not to live in their house. They're wanting to rent somewhere else, but they get treated like second-class citizens. But let's go back to talking about sales, that the purchaser has been made so uncomfortable they feel they have to get a third party in, which is fine. I'm happy to do that. It was all fine on the day. I didn't have any problem. We organised with the real estate agent. They were quite polite. When I got there for the final inspection, like, the vendor was living there. There was boxes everywhere. Everything was pretty much in pristine condition. No marks on walls, no holes in walls. It was all fine. So it ended up being fine and it settled on the day. But this is the scenario and the experience this buyer had with that real estate agent, because that's who they felt they had the problem with, because it's not the solicitor organising the final inspection or attending the final inspection. It's the real estate agent. And so, I mean, she was fine. She spent her whole time with her nose in her phone while I was there. and I'd ask her some questions about getting things working, testing electrical things like the heating and the cooling and that kind of thing, and she would interact with me then. But otherwise, she stood on the front porch with her face in her phone, and that's what she did the whole time. No interest at all in talking to me or being involved in it. So it is just very curious about how you're in the business of people, how you don't interact with the people. And real estate, I talk about as a generational business. It absolutely is, because we get clients from past clients that we've worked with. If we've worked with the parents, we'll get the friends, we'll get other family members, we'll get their siblings. We recently worked with a client that was a sibling of another client that we bought a house for 6 years ago. So this is what I mean by generational. And really, how hard is it to be nice to people? It just blows my mind. And I had another scenario just this week with the real estate agent I'm dealing with. You know, the property I keep talking about, the big landmark property that's on a long settlement. We finally got in touch with them to organise the final inspection. So we sent an email through to the real estate agents. I had a conversation with my clients about the times and the days that are going to suit with them, about when we need to be doing the final inspection, the timelines, the timeframes in order to get those done. And we agreed on a day and a time that was going to suit them, because they've got to come in from interstate, and it's going to be something they have to organise, like a whole effort to be here to do that. So we put that in an email, which is our standard practice, to the real estate agent, saying, hey, look, are you available on these times and dates? Next thing, I get a text message from my client that the real estate agent has rung them. They didn't reply to our email. They rang the client. So again, with ethics, there's ethics in real estate in relation to like respect, some professional courtesy. That's the word I'm looking for. Professional courtesy in relation to how we all interact with each other. So where there is a buyer's advocate involved and we're dealing with the real estate agent, and we're asking the questions on behalf of our client, then our expectation is, and what most of the agents do, is they come back to us and we have a conversation. The challenge that we find sometimes is where a client comes to us after they've already been out and about hunting, which is not uncommon because they get so fed up with the process and dealing with real estate agents that they will come to us in a state of absolute despair going, can you help us? So oftentimes the real estate agents in the areas that they're looking will already have their contact details. Now, most do respect that they are now working with a professional buyer's agent, and they will continue having the conversations via us. And we say, can you please not contact our client? Please come via us. And they respect that. And I absolutely respect the agents that do that. But not all do. And I say to my clients, because I'll say, what happens if they ring me or they text me or whatever? I say, if you speak to them, just say they need to speak to Wendy now. Or if they text you, just let me know and I'll contact the agent and I'll continue the conversation on behalf of my client. So I rang my client and he said he'd rung one of the other agents in the office, but then that agent had rung him, had a conversation, said, no, I can't do that day, it doesn't suit. And then they had agreed on a time, all of which we would have done on behalf of our client. So I rang that real estate agent and I said, I'm just calling about the final inspection. He said, yes, your client rang me. I said, no, my client rang your colleague. He didn't ring you. He said, no, he rang me. I know for a fact he didn't ring him. So fluid with the truth. I don't know if they don't think that I know what's going on, because I do. And it's not too hard to work out what is going on because I know how you roll. So anyway, later in the conversation, he said, oh, yes, my colleague passed on the details okay. So now you're actually telling me what happened, which I already knew what had happened. But, you change your story halfway through. So it's very, very interesting dealing with real estate agents because they don't always tell the truth. And that's the fact of the matter. And it's just it's just the nature of the industry, unfortunately. And to some degree I'm used to it, and I shouldn't be surprised, and I certainly was not surprised that this happened with this real estate agent, because he's been difficult to deal with the whole way along. Because he has the details of my client, he just chooses to organise that. So when I did ring him and said, I'm just calling about it, he said, oh, yes, I've organised it. We're going to have it on this time. It's interesting. It's a different conversation than I know went on about him being really difficult when he was speaking to my client. But when I call him about it, everything is hunky-dory and so forth, which it wasn't. It absolutely wasn't. But that's the world we live in. So if you would like to get support locally here in Melbourne or Victoria, we do have our Chamberlain Advocates buyer's advocacy, buyer's agent. That's what we do. So if you need someone to attend for you a final inspection, if you need someone to negotiate for you, bid at auction, or the full service is to find you off-market opportunities, then that's what we're here to do. You can get in touch with us via chamberlainadvocates.com.au. And right now, you can have a look at our getstartedinproperty.com.au mentoring program, which is your step-by-step, hold your hand, show you, follow the bouncing ball, how you can get confident to know exactly what it is you need to do when it comes to buying real estate. So you may wish to jump into that arena yourself, because you might be looking to buy your first home. You might be buying another home. You might be looking to buy an investment. And you just need to better understand how to do those steps, how to negotiate, how to bid at auction, how to have those conversations with the agents, what the agent conversations need to be to extract the information that you need into your data bank when it comes to buying a property, because there are many, many moving parts. And it's not just about knowing what parts there are, because we go through that as well, but it's about knowing the order in which those parts need to be put in place, the process. So once again, I thank you very warmly for joining me on my Property Mama Adventures in Real Estate. If you're enjoying listening, please do give us a thumbs up, give us a like, give us a 5-star rating, and that will help us expand and reach more people to share more of our adventures. As always, if you have any questions or comments with anything to do with real estate, feel free to drop us a line across any of our social media platforms, or you can go to propertymama.com.au and get in touch with us there. So thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to joining you on a future episode of Property Mama Adventures in Real Estate. Bye-bye for now.